2023 is already long gone, seeing as we're a full month into 2024, so I know I'm super late on this one. I know this video is not coming out at the most optimal time for the algorithm, but I read a good chunk of books in the last half of the year that I still want to talk about, and seeing as I'll be putting a pause on the frequent book reviews, this will be one of the last times I get to review some books until later this year in November, December. That said, I don't want you to worry, book-related content won't be absent on the channel. I've actually got some really cool stuff planned this year, like collaborations with other channels and just different types of booktube content. But the reviews themselves will be limited to the end of the year book reads tier list like this one for the time being. Now, this is a part 2 for my 2023 reads, and you can check out part 1 using the link at the top of the screen right now, or in the description below if you want to hear more of my thoughts on these specific ones. But I also did put out reviews for them individually, save for Clown in a Cornfield, so those are some options as well. I've got 10 more books to add today, which all help me end the year with 16 books in total, not counting novellas or graphic novels, even though some of them would qualify as full-length novels by any other author, Sanderson. However, including everything I read, my word count topped out at 2,591,113 words. So, yeah. But enough chit-chat, let's get things started at the bottom. And so, kicking off the OK tier, I have a newly published book by an indie author I met on TikTok, Carousel by T.C. Ellefson. Now, this is actually something I'm quite proud of. I'm trying to give more indie authors a chance, especially ones who are kind enough to give me the light of day and talk to me personally, and Mr. Ellefson is the first of many for this new trend of mine.
Oh yeah, that's a good stuff.
I think he's a great guy and a great dad, and going into it, I thought Carousel posed a lot of potential, seeing as it's heavily inspired by Sanderson's Mistborn series, and has a sort of inside-out twist to it, with the magic system revolving around emotions rather than metals. The story follows its main character, Carousel, a girl in her mid-teens who is hell-bent on unraveling the mysteries behind her mother's murder, only to find out just how big her world is, and just how deep its conspiracies go. There's a ton of magic, a ton of twists and turns, a great effort at expanding this world beyond the main city of Heartbell. However, for every pro within this novel, it was unfortunately burdened by a con as well. In terms of the writing, I thought the tone was hugely dissonant with the diction choices and overall style or prose. This is supposed to be a young girl speaking, given that it is written in first person, but it often felt more like the author speaking than the teenage Carousel. Sometimes we get these amazing passages filled with great prose, and then it snaps back to this immature, somewhat annoying voice.
That sucks, man. Yep.
The prose and the wording is also riddled with repetitiveness, so much so that I was questioning throughout my read whether or not this book actually had an editor.
Whoa, that seems a little harsh.
Now, the story itself is great in a lot of parts, but things are also definitely rushed. There are some fine reveals and twists, some I saw coming from chapter 1, and some I had no way of anticipating. But while there's a ton of action within this story, there's little to no reaction by its characters, which undermines the impact of those action sequences. I say this in a lot of my reviews, but we readers need time to process and bask in the good moments of a story, or else they start to feel underwhelming. If there's an awesome scene but the characters pay no mind to it and just move on to the next battle or the new task at hand, then the story is asserting that us readers should also not care about what we just read, which is sort of like shooting yourself in the foot.
Not a great plan.
Lastly, I think Mr. Ellefson does an amazing job at painting a picture within your mind. It's probably his greatest strength as an author within this novel, and the magic system is also very cool. It's the thing that sold me on actually picking up this book from him and giving it a read. However, it could have definitely used more tinkering during the development stage. It just didn't feel fully realized, and I never at any point within this novel felt like I had a decent understanding of its mechanics. I think Ellefson shows a ton of potential as a newer author. He certainly writes at a decent pace from what I've seen, and he's a Sanderson fan, so he's shooting for stories that I know we both enjoy. So I desperately want to recommend him to others, but unfortunately, I just can't do that with Carousel in good conscience. I'll be keeping an eye on him and his literary career, but as for now, I'd say this is one you can pass on. But moving on and speeding things up, I have The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. My wife and I have been picking up heartwarming stories to read together at night, and this is the one we started this new tradition with. However, while my wife really enjoyed this one, it's not something that was written for me. This is a fantasy romance, or romantasy as many refer to this genre, that follows a witch without a place to call home who is called upon to help a trio of young witches who desperately need training on how to control their powers. The issue is that in this world, witches follow a certain set of rules, one of those being that they should never occupy the same space for long, especially younger, inexperienced ones. Mika Moon has her work cut out for her, not just with tutoring 3 young kids, but also in breaking the norms of their magical society. And look, this book is super predictable. It checks off all the boxes for this genre with lovable and rough on the edges characters alike, the will they won't they trope, and traumatic pasts. It also has a super sweet story, although unfocused at times, with believable motivations and relatable reactions from our characters. However, what greatly holds this one back for me is its writing style. I know a lot of people enjoy this style. It certainly reminded me of the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, which a ton of people just fell in love with, but the run-off sentences that have no end in sight make it so hard for me to read books like this. It just turns a delightful story into a chore of a read for me.
Well, that's unfortunate.
That said, if that particular style doesn't put you off to a book and you are looking for a new romantasy book, well then maybe check this one out. You probably will enjoy it. But moving on up the ladder and to the top of the good tier is Book 5 of the Dresden Files, Death Masks. I've been really enjoying my read of this series, however, I have learned that I cannot binge it without them all fusing together in my head and losing all personal identity. And so Death Masks unfortunately suffers from that, seeing as I picked it up right after Book 4. And look, I thought it was a fine continuation of the story, with great world building, more emotional and personal consequences for our characters, and a continually improving arc for both Dresden and Susan. But at the end of the day, it just read like another cog in the machine rather than an impactful event within the overarching story. I can certainly see it being some fans' favorite of the first 5, but it just didn't click with me as much as it probably should have. I hope on a reread, if I ever do one way down the line, that I'm able to enjoy this one more, but the repetitiveness within this one makes it so hard to identify any key and unique elements that sets it apart from the rest. I'll take a break and come back to this series with fresh eyes soon enough, but as for now, I might just be Dresdened out. Coming in above it, the lone book in my great tier is going to be Defiant, Book 4 of Brandon Sanderson's Skyward series. This is the epic culmination of the Cytoverse, or at least the main series ahead of the upcoming Skyward Legacy sequel series from Jancy Patterson. And being the 4th and final full-length novel within this series, it certainly came with many expectations, but for the most part, I thought it delivered. It's not exactly the conclusion I expected from this series, which both has its pros and cons. I don't want the series finale to be predictable, but I also want it to be in line with the series overall. That said, this book is much darker and far more mature than the first 3. It's a harrowing and deeply thematic introspective for Spensa and Jorgen as they both grapple with the huge changes in their lives and the new trajectory they have forced upon their entire race. I think the novella certainly helped to prime the reader for this more serious type of story, and when it comes to these characters' studies, the book is hard to put down, but in terms of the overall narrative, I don't think it fully succeeded. For one, I found the story to be quite repetitive for the first third as we witness a certain dilemma within Spensa and are forced to wait for her to become a bit more proactive and actually do the things she says she's gonna do. And secondly, in terms of the sci-fi action, which I certainly anticipated to have some awesome moments, I actually thought it was a bit of a letdown, especially with its Sanderlanche climax. Sanderson makes a ton of bold choices within this book, and simply put, some of them landed and some of them felt off the mark. Thematically and character-wise, it's on par with Skyward, but in terms of the overall package, I'd say it's more in line with Starsight, which was a great sequel, but given that Defiant is supposed to be the big finale, it's a harder one to judge. All in all, it's a great book and a satisfactory conclusion to the main series, but I don't see this one being most fans' favorite.
Wow, that's rough. I'm sorry.
But moving on up and kicking off the fantastic tier, I have Book 4 of the Dresden Files, Summer Night. After Grave Peril, which many fans say is where the series truly finds its legs, I was hoping for another awesome dark adventure, and I was not disappointed. Narratively, it's on par with the first three for me, but in terms of its world building and character development, I thought it was the best of the first four by far.
Oh yeah!
Getting to see the White Council and its political action, the two sides of the Never Never, summer and winter, Undertown and the Table, all these things and more make the magical side of Chicago feel more real and involved within Dresden's story. It continues Harry's arc after Susan's departure in the last book, actually giving Harry's character something to work on and work towards. And it gives more chances and more reasons for new and old characters to make appearances and add to that layered story of a troubled wizard. Now, the plot itself, and mainly the villains and the overall mystery, are not my favorites of these first five that I've read. However, the world building, the politics, the history, and all these greater mysteries within the series that are unraveled and or teased for the future here make this a stellar early installment and an overall fantastic read. But sneaking past it, as well as Dune, I have our first Cosmere book on the list, Warbreaker. Now, I've talked at length about this one in my review for it, as well as a Cosmere tier list I just recently put out, so I won't talk too much about it here. But overall, this is a solid novel by Brandon Sanderson with great characters and one of the most unique and well thought out magic systems from his expanding universe. It is basically required reading for any Cosmere fan that wants to make all the connections, as its magic system is super relevant and it introduces 3 key world hoppers that you'll see within another series if you keep a watchful eye. I think the pacing is this book's biggest weakness. It takes time to form connections with the characters and feel invested yourself. However, it only helps the characters' arcs to hit that much harder in the end. They are assuredly some of the best within the Cosmere.
You can say that again.
Overall, it's a slow burn of a book filled with fantasy politics, magic, and emotional journeys, but it is thoroughly enjoyable. Moving on to the next book on my list, and another Cosmere book at that, is Secret Project number 4, The Sunlit Man. This is the most recently released Cosmere novel, and is certainly one that I would only recommend to those who are entirely caught up on the Cosmere. It assumes readers have read the Stormlight Archive books 1 through 4, but it goes even further than that, not merely referencing other series, but also relying on the reader's knowledge of a certain novella from the Arcanum Unbounded. That said, it's a ton of fun, being a fast-paced action thriller that follows the character of Nomad, who wakes up on a planet alien to him, and now must figure out its form of investiture to get himself off it and back on the run from a newly introduced antagonist that will serve a large role in the overarching story of the Cosmere. It's what I would call a popcorn book that uses all of B-Money's classic bells and whistles. I don't find it to be largely surprising or epically unique as far as the plot goes, but the mysterious nature of the planet and Nomad's personal story pulled me in and kept me engaged from start to finish. And again, if you'd like to know more, I did put out a review for this one, as I have for most Cosmere novels. But filling in the fantastic tier for today, I have Stephen King's Needful Things. Normally, I'm a huge sucker for any dark and scary book from the King of Horror, however, Needful Things is very much not a horror. If anything, it's a dark comedy or a sinister drama that follows a new store opening in the town of Castle Rock, where the premise is basically, what if the devil set up shop in your hometown?
Ooh, scary.
There's a ton of twists and turns, the writing is creepy, the story is chilling, and the characters are complex and compelling. It's a long read, but it's a suspenseful and rewarding one. It pulls you into its world and grabs hold of you, just as Mr. Leland Gaunt sinks his claws into the town of Castle Rock, so if you're ever in the mood for a longer, chilling book, this is certainly a great option. Now, I will say that this is the only Castle Rock book I've personally read, and I did not feel ostracized at all. There are connections to King's other books set within this town, but I found that he filled me in with the perfect amount of information whenever necessary. But moving on to my number 2 read of the year, coming in above Tress of the Emerald Sea in the God tier is B-Money's remaining secret project, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. The more I've reflected on this read, the more it has solidified as my favorite from the year of Sanderson. It was a close call with Tress, but in my mind, with Hoyd's goofier tone dialed back a bit, 2 main leads rather than 1, and some very emotional storytelling filled with tons of narrative puzzle pieces that just all come together so beautifully in the end, I have to give it to Secret Project 3.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This book feels like a beautiful dance, and it comes with some very refreshing and exciting Cosmere connections, most of which are Stormlight heavy, which is my personal favorite series within the Cosmere. I felt like I both learned a lot about the Cosmere's inner workings and was also rewarded for my existing knowledge going into this one. Now, the other Cosmere secret projects were similar in that way, and I certainly would not blame anyone for putting Tress or even the Sunlit Man above it, but for me, this is the one that spoke to me most from the Year of Sanderson, and I am so grateful for it. Again, I did put out a review for this one, which includes a spoiler-free section as well as a spoiler talk, and I think I came up with some pretty good theories, so check it out if that sounds interesting to you. But topping them all, coming in clutch at the buzzer, is the last book I read in 2023, M.L. Wong's The Sword of Kaigen. Another Japanese-inspired, standalone fantasy novel. It was a close call on which of these last two to put at the top, but from the start, The Sword of Kaigen absolutely blew me away, and that is with years of building anticipation and expectation, so I think this is the one most deserving of the top billing spot.
That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
This book feels so huge and yet so small and intimate at the same time, providing an epic filled with magic, culture, and rigorous character work on the same level as The Lord of the Rings and The Wheel of Time. This is what I personally wish the Greenbone Saga would have been, with a more direct story and a world that feels organic and already established. You are tossed into this story and this world and are just expected to pick up the pieces as you go, such as how the magic works as well as the language and terminology for things in this world. That said, I believe the author unveils mysteries and fleshes out this world at a perfect pace. However, if you are like me and you don't want to miss anything, there is both a very helpful glossary and appendix in the back, as well as detailed maps in the front. The story itself follows a mother and son from their two very different points of view, with them both learning their places in a warrior culture as parts of the head warrior family of their town. The book dives deep into the topics of duty, love, and troubled relationships, as well as themes such as truth, propaganda, pride, and focusing on the good in life within such a complicated and messy world. While I don't think the book completely hits the landing, especially with the last chapter being the longest chapter and merely set up for a currently failed and discontinued series,
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
I try to look at it as a set of endings similar to The Return of the King, with the last few chapters tying up separate loose ends, each in beautiful ways. For the effort alone, this one has got to go at the top for me. It's an intense story that serves as a loose allegory for World War II and comes equipped with my favorite interpretation yet for an elemental-based magic system, feeling like the perfect blend of Avatar: The Last Airbender and Pixar's Elemental.
Oh yeah, that's a good stuff.
The story structure is not my favorite, but the pacing, the thematic character studies and lessons, and the world that's built and utilized within this book make it an instant classic in my mind. But those are just the books I read this past year, and I would love to hear what your favorite and least favorite reads of 2023 were. Let me know, is there anything I should have on my TBR? And what are you most looking forward to reading in 2024? From today's video, you can probably guess what my most anticipated read is. Yeah, that's the one. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you aren't already. Again, I have reviews for almost all the books we talked about today, so if you want to hear more about any particular book, check out the book review playlist in the outro. But as for now, that's it from me. Thank you so much for tuning in and sticking around. I will see you all next time.